Chapter 1. The Testament and the Silence of the Past. In the small town of Valle Encantado, surrounded by green mountains and time-faded colonial houses, the name Doña Eulalia was synonymous with respect and mystery. She had been the matriarch of the powerful Delgado family, owners of land, real estate, and businesses that sustained much of the local economy for nearly a century. Her death at 94 shocked the entire town, but it was what came next that divided not only the family, but the entire community. Doña Eulalia left behind 3 granddaughters, Renata, the eldest, controlling and cold like the marble fireplaces in her grandmother's mansion; Carolina, the middle child, vain and obsessed with appearances; and Sofia, the youngest, introspective, devoted to art and reading, often considered the black sheep of the family. All 3 grew up under the same gilded roof, surrounded by the same servants and the same traditions, but each harbored hidden grudges, fueled by secrets they never dared to confess. The day of the will reading attracted the attention of the entire town. The family lawyer, a gray-haired and meticulous man named Dr. Beltran, scheduled the meeting in the mansion's old library. Tall bookshelves, heavy curtains, and the scent of old papers created a solemn and suffocating atmosphere. The 3 sisters sat silently, each maintaining their own rigid posture, trying to hide their nervousness. Doña Eulalia had left behind a considerable fortune. Land in Mendoza, award-winning wineries, a historic mansion in Cartagena, company shares and unique jewelry. Carolina believed that as the person closest to her grandmother in her later years, she would inherit the majority. Renata trusted her rationality and the fact that she had always helped manage the family estate. Sofia, however, expected nothing. And perhaps because of that, she was the only one who listened attentively to every word Beltran read. However, at the end of the reading, nothing had been decided. The will was incomplete. A section had been removed, as if someone had torn it out of the binder before the meeting. A commotion filled the room. Beltran, visibly uncomfortable, warned that he would have to investigate the incident, as the last appendix containing the final total distribution clause was missing. The sisters looked at each other, and in that instant something was sealed in the air. A silent war had begun. If you like the story, subscribe to the channel and give it a thumbs up so you don't miss the next episodes. Your participation is essential so we can continue bringing you exciting stories like this one. Chapter 2. The First Cracks. In the days following the mysterious, incomplete reading of the will, the atmosphere in the Delgado mansion changed. Pain gave way to mistrust. The sisters, previously estranged by choice, were forced to live under the same roof, while lawyer Dr. Beltran investigated the missing document. Each believed the other might be involved, and without proof, silence was their only weapon. Renata, accustomed to keeping tabs on everything around her, began combing through old files, correspondence, and even her grandmother's belongings. She wanted to find some proof that Eulalia considered her the natural heir. She found nothing but coded letters, diaries with torn-out pages, and cryptic notes about trust, blood, and justice. Carolina, for her part, began visiting her grandmother's former employees, trying to gather testimony that might support her case. With forced smiles and expensive gifts, she discreetly questioned them. Many averted their eyes. Others simply murmured. Doña Eulalia was never predictable. Sofia, the most discreet of the 3, decided to take refuge in her grandmother's old greenhouse, a space abandoned after an unfinished renovation. There, among dried plants and furniture covered with white sheets, she discovered something that would change the course of events: a small iron trunk hidden under a loose floorboard. The trunk contained a set of old letters and family photos, and something else, a rusty key bearing the Delgado family crest. In the mansion's halls, the sisters' gazes lengthened, grew colder. What had once been resentment now turned into vigilance. Each step was measured, neither trusted the other. The disappearance of the will revealed more than a legal mystery. It exposed decades of resentment hidden beneath a veneer of nobility. Rumors began to circulate in the town. Some said the will had been burned. Others claimed that Doña Eulalia had left everything to an illegitimate granddaughter raised in secret. Speculation grew, and the family name, once synonymous with power and tradition, was now repeated with disdain on street corners. In that context, no one noticed the figure that passed through the kitchen one night. No one heard the creak of the ancient tower door as it opened, and no one saw Sophie's fixed gaze as she hid the rusty key under the scarf she wore around her neck, because, unlike her sisters, she didn't just want to discover the truth. She was willing to accept anything revealed to her, and what was to come would shake the foundations of the Delgado family forever. Chapter 3. The Tower and the Burnt Portrait. At the heart of the Delgado mansion was a forgotten wing, sealed off for years, where time seemed to have frozen. It was known as the East Tower, a space no one had entered since the sisters' grandfather, Don Lorenzo, tragically died after falling down the spiral staircase. Since then, the tower had remained closed by order of Doña Eulalia. Many believed it was out of respect for her husband's memory. Others whispered that it was out of fear of what lurked there. With the rusty key in her hand, Sophia waited for nightfall. While Renata and Carolina discussed the progress of the investigation with the lawyer, she walked silently through the mansion's hallways, avoiding places where the floorboards creaked under her weight. When she reached the tower door, she felt a chill run down her spine. The lock held for a few seconds and then gave way with a sharp click. The smell of mold, old wood, and stale memories filled the air. Dust danced in the light of the flashlight she held. Old family portraits hung on the walls, some partially burned. One caught her eye, a painting depicting a young woman with sad eyes and dark hair, too similar to her to be a coincidence. In the bottom corner of the painting, a barely legible inscription read, "To Monsieur, may she never be forgotten." There was also a wall safe, locked with a combination number. Above it, a sagging shelf revealed faded books and a red, leather-bound notebook. In it, Doña Eulalia had written memoirs dating back decades, recounting passages not found in any other known diary. There, Sophia discovered that not everything was as it seemed. Eulalia spoke of a lost daughter, snatched from the family by a scandal in the early 1970s. Apparently, this daughter had fled the country after becoming pregnant by a man the family disapproved of. The baby had been born in secret, and its whereabouts had been kept strictly confidential, for safety and honor, in Eulalia's cold words. Rereading the fragments, a bold idea began to form in Sophia's mind. If that girl existed, would it be her? Suddenly, so many things made sense. The sisters' indifferent treatment, the way Eulalia always watched her with a mixture of guilt and affection, the visits to the family doctor as a child, always without explanation. Could she, who had grown up feeling out of place, be the daughter of the disowned daughter? While these doubts tormented her, Carolina, on the other side of the house, received an anonymous envelope slipped under the door. Inside, a single photo, Sophia entering the tower, key in hand. Behind the image, a handwritten message. She found what no one should have found. Chapter 4. The vault reveals the second testament. The tension in the Delgado mansion had reached an irreversible point. Renata pressured the lawyer day and night, demanding answers. Carolina had become a silent shadow, observing everything with a colder gaze than ever since she received the revealing photo. And Sophia, while feigning routine in the hallways, spent the early morning hours in the tower, immersed in a sea of truths she wasn't sure she wanted to have discovered. The red leather notebook revealed more with each page. Doña Eulalia's handwriting, once firm, became unsteady over time, but her words were steadfast. She confessed to abandoning her own daughter, Mariana, when she became pregnant by a poor man with no last name. A decision made out of pride, and for the good of the lineage, she said. After birth, the baby was secretly given to an orphanage in Oaxaca, Mexico. Years later, the girl was adopted by a distant couple, and no one ever heard from her again. No one except Eulalia. There was one last note, made shortly before the matriarch's death. Blood does not die. Those who carry the true legacy will know how to find it. The inheritance does not belong to those who inherited the name, but to those who inherited the silence. These words led Sophia to the safe's combination. After spending nights studying dates, phrases and clues hidden between the diary pages, she took a risk. She wrote down her missing mother's birth date, September 11th, 1971. With a metallic click and a slow creak, the safe opened. Inside, wrapped in cloth embroidered with the Delgado coat of arms, was the authentic will, signed and sealed with a notary's seal. Eulalia made it clear: the entire fortune, land, real estate, stocks, artifacts, accounts, and historical assets, was to be transferred to her legitimate granddaughter, Mariana's daughter. Her full name appeared there, in shaky but legible handwriting: Sofia Mariana Castillo Delgado. Sophia's heart raced. The truth was irrefutable. For the first time in her life, she understood why she felt different, why her grandmother looked at her with a mixture of affection and guilt. With the document in her hand, she felt the weight of responsibility, but also the imminent danger. Because Carolina, after seeing the photo, not only suspected, but already knew. And Renata, even without proof, sensed something was stirring beneath the surface. The next morning, when she went down to breakfast, Sophia noticed that everything had changed. The sisters' expressions were different. The atmosphere was as cold as ever. And that same afternoon, an anonymous letter arrived at Dr. Beltran's office with a complaint. One of the sisters has found a hidden document and plans to use it to steal everything. Investigate before it's too late. The game was already out in the open, but Sophia knew the truth, and the others only knew their names. If this story captivated you as much as it did Sophia, don't miss the next episodes. Subscribe to the channel and give it a like. It helps us continue bringing you amazing stories like this one. Chapter 5. The Cold-Blooded Counterattack. The anonymous tip sent to Dr. Beltran's office landed like a silent bomb. Experienced and methodical, he understood the poison running through wealthy heirs and therefore acted coldly. Without informing his sisters, he went to the Delgado mansion accompanied by a local civil registry official and demanded immediate access to all areas of the property. The sudden arrival of the legal representatives took Renata by surprise, made Carolina break out in a cold sweat, and forced Sophia to hide the will in a secret compartment in the tower, improvised under the floorboards. She knew she couldn't hand it over yet, not while the others surrounded her like silent predators, but Sophia did not count on Carolina's cunning. Days earlier, Carolina had discreetly hired a private investigator, one who had worked for local politicians. She sent him to Oaxaca with instructions to determine if Sophia had any connection to the orphanage mentioned in Doña Eulalia's notebooks. The suspicion was becoming obsessive. For Carolina, nothing Sophia had achieved could be legitimate. After all, she had always been the one who least deserved it. Meanwhile, Renata had decided that silence was no longer enough. Frustrated by the slowness of the process and tired of waiting, she hired a forensic document expert. Her plan: to prove that any new will that emerged was a forgery. Unbeknownst to her, the real document was already in Sophia's possession. She was already preparing to destroy it if it appeared. The atmosphere in the house became stifling. The air was thick, the doors were closed, and whispers echoed through the walls. The maids no longer slept there. The former butlers had resigned. And the neighbors began to avoid the property, saying something evil was brewing in this once untouchable family. Sophia, for her part, returned to the tower every night. Absolute silence. She read and reread her grandmother's letters, studied the records, memorized every detail of the will. She knew she would have to present concrete evidence, and that the document alone wouldn't be enough. She needed testimonies, adoption certificates, fragments of truth that could withstand the sisters' legal attacks. It was then that she found something unexpected. Inside a carved wooden box was a handwritten letter from Mariana herself, Sophia's biological mother. It described how she had been forced to give up her daughter, but made it clear that one day she would return to tell her everything, if her heart could bear it. The letter had never been sent. Perhaps Doña Eulalia had kept it, fearing Mariana would return. Sophia wept silently as she read each line, and there, in the shadow of the tower, she made a promise. She wouldn't just fight for an inheritance. She would fight for the story her mother could never tell. The next morning, the investigator, Carolina hired, returned from Oaxaca. He brought with him more than Carolina expected: birth certificates, adoption certificates, and a copy of a letter written by a nurse at the orphanage describing the baby's delivery to a noble-looking woman with grey hair and a stern look. Carolina read silently, her blood running cold. The woman described was Doña Eulalia. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was a threat. And now, the only thing left to decide was who would attack first. Chapter 6. When truth becomes danger, the situation had changed. Carolina, now in possession of evidence confirming Sophia's adoption and biological origins, did not remain silent. Filled with rage and a sense of ancestral betrayal, she began operating in the shadows, sowing suspicion everywhere. She used her connections to smear her younger sister's name, insinuating that she had falsified documents, manipulated records, and influenced public officials. Meanwhile, Renata, always practical and impersonal, received news that the expert she hired had detected the authenticity of the seal and signature on the new will, a result she refused to accept. She ordered the tests to be repeated in another laboratory. Deep down, something inside her whispered the truth, but her rational mind clung to control, like a shipwrecked person clings to wood. Aware that she was being watched, Sophia began to act even more cautiously. She avoided conversations and secluded herself in public libraries to thoroughly research the legal procedures for validating alternative wills. She discovered that, to validate the document, she would need 2 living witnesses who could recognize Doña Eulalia's signature on the new will. And with that, she thought of only one person who could still help her: Father Alonso, her grandmother's longtime confessor and one of the few men the matriarch respected. The problem was that Father Alonso had disappeared. It was rumored that after Eulalia's death, she had abandoned the convent and retired to live in a mountain village where she spent her days in penance. Determined, Sophia set out alone one rainy afternoon, driving along winding and dangerous roads. Upon arriving at the village, she found the elderly priest living in a wooden cabin, his hands calloused and his mind fragile. However, when she showed him the will, his eyes lit up. He recognized the signature instantly, and he said something that changed everything. He made me promise that, when the truth came out, I would be on the side of the righteous, While Sophia returned home with the first confirmed witness, Carolina took the initiative. Using an old clause in her previous will, she requested a court order to restrain her sister from her court due to emotional instability. Attorney Dr. Beltran was dismayed by the decision, but was forced to attend an emergency hearing. The conflict was no longer a game of secrets, but a formal war. In the midst of it all, Renata began to understand that she had passed the point of no return. Her rigidity was no longer strength, but armor against guilt. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Sophia would have to prove not only her sanity, but also her legitimacy. Time was running out, but fate had one more secret for her. In the early hours of Saturday morning, the Delgado mansion was invaded. They didn't steal anything, but they ransacked the tower, tore the newspapers from the shelves, and broke into the safe. The will disappeared, and on the antique desk rested a photograph that hadn't been there before, an old photo of Doña Eulalia holding a baby. On the back, just 3 words written in black ink. She knew everything. The game now had no rules. Chapter 7. Burning Fragments and Cutting Silence. The image found on the desk was more than a provocation. It was a message, and it wasn't for Sophia. The morning after the invasion, the mansion sank into a strange state of suspension. The sun barely penetrated the heavy curtains. The servants were gone. No coffee had been served. The house seemed to hold its breath. Sophia, seeing the broken-into safe and the empty space where the will had been hidden, felt a lurch in her stomach. The photograph left there contained something even more disturbing. The baby in Eulalia's arms was no ordinary child. His features were unmistakably hers. This was the living proof that could seal her fate. But now it was also in the wrong hands. She understood for the first time that she was being pursued not for money, but for her history. This family wasn't just fighting for possessions, they were fighting to preserve an empire built on carefully buried lies. Renata, who always maintained her composure, locked herself in her grandfather's old office and didn't come out for hours. There, among accounting books and contracts, she searched her memories. She recalled whispered conversations, half-open doors, letters disappearing from her grandmother's desk. Little by little, she began to understand that her mother had hidden more than she ever imagined, and that Mariana's exile wasn't due to scandal, but to fear. Carolina, for her part, hadn't slept. Sophia's adoption certificate, the photos from the orphanage, and the nurse's letter were now in her safe, and she regarded each document as if it were dynamite about to explode. A vengeful impulse took hold of her. If Sophia was truly the heir, then she, Carolina, the legitimate heir, would be dispossessed by a stranger, rescued from oblivion, and this was intolerable to her ego. On Sunday afternoon, before the hearing, a fire broke out in the tower wing. The flames consumed the antique furniture, memoirs, and almost all the family portraits. By the time the firefighters arrived, the blaze had already consumed everything. The subsequent report would indicate that the fire started due to an electrical fault. But Sophia knew it had been a calculated act. Someone had deliberately erased the past. However, fate had not yet dealt him all its cards. While searching through her belongings saved from the fire, Sophia found inside the cover of a poetry collection inherited from Eulalia a page folded in 4. It was a second copy of the will, handwritten and signed by her grandmother, without official seals, but with the same firm and elegant handwriting. A draft, perhaps, kept as a precaution. More than a piece of genius, that paper was a symbol. A ray of hope. That night, before the hearing, Sophia slept. For the first time, with the conviction that, despite the flames, the truth had not been burned, But on the other side of the window, someone stood in the darkness, staring at the edge of the garden, their gaze fixed on the bright light from the tower room. They held a white envelope, and inside was the key to turning the tide. Chapter 8. The Judgment Room. On the morning of the hearing, the sky over Enchanted Valley was cloudy, heavy with the throngs of souls passing through the halls of the municipal courthouse. The courtroom, paneled with dark wood and worn benches, smelled of the past and tension. The judge, a man with a stern face and a bad temper, was known for his ironclad impartiality, something that worried everyone involved. In the front seat, Sophia held her chin high, the envelope containing the copy of the will tucked into the folds of a folder. Sitting next to her was Father Alonso, summoned at the last minute as a key witness. Despite his fragile movements, the priest's gaze was steady. He had come to fulfill his promise to Eulalia and to redeem, however belatedly, the silence he had maintained for decades. Renata, her eyes shadowed by dark circles, sat further back. For the first time, she seemed to have no control. The world around her was collapsing, not in a sudden explosion, but like an old mansion slowly sinking beneath its own unstable foundations. She carried a folder full of technical counter-arguments, but nothing certain in her heart. Carolina, dressed in a cruel elegance, carried what she believed to be her last weapon, the documentation obtained by the investigator, the orphanage files, and the accusation that Sophia suffered from emotional imbalance and tampered with historical documents. Her cold, determined gaze betrayed no doubt, only a fear of losing. The hearing began with a formal presentation of the facts. Carolina's lawyer presented the accusations with pomp and aggression. Sophia had allegedly breached her grandmother's trust, manipulated documents, and finally stolen a will for her own benefit. In response, Dr. Beltran, previously neutral, now clearly on Sophia's side, requested the floor. He removed the yellowed envelope containing the draft will from the folder and announced that there was crucial new evidence to consider. With the judge's permission, he handed over the sheet of paper. The silence that followed was profound. The judge read the document carefully. He then summoned the court's expert for an initial graphological analysis. Meanwhile, Father Alonso was invited to testify, and it was at that moment that the story of the Delgado family, until then told in whispers and suspicions, unfolded loudly, like a veil torn before a crowd. The priest recounted how Eulalia had confessed to him, years before, the mistake she had made with her daughter, Mariana. She revealed that Sophia was a product of the family's hidden lineage. She told him the request she had received, to protect the child when the time came, and with a broken voice she declared before everyone, "This young woman is more Delgado than anyone in this room." The words fell like stones into a frozen lake. The impact was silent but profound. The expert returned with the initial results: compatible handwriting, legitimate signature, natural aging of the paper, compatible with the claimed period. The judge then announced a 72-hour recess for final validation of the data and the summoning of new witnesses. Outside the room, Renata approached Sophia for the first time in weeks. She said nothing. She simply looked at her with a mixture of surrender and respect, as if recognizing for the first time the hidden name that Sophia had always carried in her blood. But before the young woman could breathe a sigh of relief, a court employee discreetly approached with a message. "An anonymous envelope has been delivered to the clerk's office. It's addressed to you." Sophia opened it with trembling hands. Inside, a single sheet, an old faded photo showing Mariana holding a baby. On the back, a handwritten phrase, in Eulalia's same firm handwriting, "May the name never weigh more than the truth." Chapter 9. The Invisible Inheritance. The hours after the hearing felt longer than the years of silence Sophia had spent in her sister's shadow. Every detail of the mansion, every photograph on the wall, every antique piece of furniture, everything seemed to be watching her, as if the ghosts of the Delgado family were awakening one by one, demanding explanations. The mansion was no longer her home. It was the scene of a trial, not just legal, but spiritual. Renata, in her secluded wing of the house, spent the night sorting through old letters from her grandmother. She had decided, without warning, not to file any further legal objections. Silently, she accepted that her fight had always been driven by obligation and pride, never by love. For the first time, she questioned whether she had truly known Eulalia, or only what she let on. She began to understand that her grandmother's legacy lay not only in her possessions, but in the emotional legacy she had left her granddaughters: control, restraint, and silence. Carolina, on the other hand, was restless. The results of the will's appraisal would be published the next day, and she knew that if it was validated, all her prestige, comfort, and hold on the Delgado family name would slip away like sand. She refused to accept that Sofia was the heir to something that, in her mind, belonged to her by blood, even if blood spoke a different language. But something inside him began to unravel when, while searching through Eulalia's old belongings for something that might change the course, he found a safe he'd never seen before, hidden behind a wooden panel painted the same color as the wardrobe. Inside was a single letter addressed to all his granddaughters. Eulalia's handwriting was shaky but clear. If this letter was found, it's because I couldn't prevent the past from resurfacing like an open wound. To you, my granddaughters, I leave more than possessions or property. I leave you the weight of my silence. Each one was loved in her own way, but only one bears the name I was ashamed to acknowledge in life. Sofia is my daughter's blood, my heir not by title, but by reparation. Don't expect justice from the justice of men, expect it from memory, because what you inherited from me is not fortune, it is consequence. Carolina dropped the letter to the floor. For the first time she felt shame, not anger, not fear, embarrassment. The next day, everyone returned to the courtroom. The courtroom was even more crowded. The story of the Delgado family dispute had already spread throughout the city and was circulating in regional newspapers, accompanied by family speculation and analysis. The judge entered the courtroom and, in a firm voice, declared, after a thorough review of the documents presented, confirmation of the signature by a recognized witness and the authenticity of the paper and ink, this court recognizes the will presented by Sofia Mariana Castillo Delgado as valid. The silence in the room was absolute. Sofia didn't smile. She didn't cry. She didn't move her lips. She simply closed her eyes for a few seconds, as if she had finally heard the whisper of an ancient soul finding peace. Renata sighed, her expression not one of defeat, but of liberation. Carolina, without looking up, left the room before the decision had fully sunk in. For the first time there was no more struggle. All that remained was to accept. Chapter 10. The Name That Endured Days. After the court ruling, the Delgado mansion was quieter than ever. The hallways, that once vibrated with firm footsteps and arrogant voices, now echoed only with the bated breath of those who remained. What had once been a symbol of power and tradition now seemed like nothing more than an old house, surrounded by memories that hurt more than they comforted. Sofia, recognized as the legitimate heir, didn't change anything immediately. She refused to transfer her assets to international banks. She rejected meetings with financial advisors. She spent the first few days in seclusion, pacing the mansion's rooms with a notebook in her hand, as if conversing with ghosts and reconstructing stories. She wasn't seeking revenge. She simply wanted to understand how so many generations had allowed silence to prevail over affection. In Eulalia's room, she found a mirror covered by a thick sheet. When she pulled it back, she saw more than just her own reflection. She saw traces of Mariana, of Eulalia, and perhaps, who knows, of the untold stories of so many other women in the family. She realized then that she had inherited something greater than land and money. She had inherited the opportunity to break the cycle. Renata disappeared for weeks until one day she sent a formal letter waiving any legal recourse and requesting only a symbolic part of the inheritance, her grandfather Lorenzo's pocket watch, nothing more. She wanted silence, and perhaps a new beginning. Carolina, meanwhile, was last seen boarding a flight to Europe. Close friends said she cut ties with everyone and began using her mother's last name. She lost not only her heritage, but also the mirror around which she built her own identity. Sophia decided to transform the mansion. She sold part of the inherited assets and created a foundation in Mariana's name, dedicated to sheltering women rejected by their families, especially single mothers. She reopened the Tower Library, now featuring books on restorative justice and historical memory. The greenhouse wing was restored. Plants flourished where dust and neglect had once lain. In the newspapers, they called her the unexpected heiress. But in Valle Encantado, he began to call her by another name, Sophia, the Just, because in the end, what remained wasn't the fortune or the family name. It was the courage to not repeat the mistakes that created it. And from the restored portrait of Eulalia on the mansion's main wall, the old matriarch's gaze seemed, at last, at peace.